Today I thought I'd show you how to do a little block tutorial on a relatively simple block. This block, I love the name of this block, it's called Contrary Wife. How funny is that? There's actually, I found 2 or 3 blocks with that same name, but this was the one that I was looking for. It's basically a 9-patch block. It's got 9 patches overall to it, and it's just got some squares and half square triangles, so relatively simple. So I've made it as a 9-inch block, so it measures 9.5 inches, and I just thought I'd go through with you quickly how to make one of these blocks. So I've done a diagram here, and I've got another diagram here that's got my I've written my notes on. I work in EQ, which is Electric Quilt, which is a software program for designing quilts, and I find that that's quite handy at times. So I've already gone ahead and made a couple of my half square triangle units for the block. However, I'm going to just show you how to achieve that. So I've cut out my patches. So the blue patches are just squares, and they're cut at 3.5 inches because these are going to be 3-inch finished to make a 9-inch. There's 3 of them across. And then these ones here also need to finish at that same size. However, because we're cutting them into triangles, we need to cut them a little bit larger. So my squares, my white and my grey, I've cut at 4 inches, and we're going to stitch across them, cut them a half, and we're going to trim them down. So for each block, you're going to need 5 of the blue or whatever colour it is that you're using, and then you need 2 of the grey squares because you just use half and half, and 2 of the white squares at 4 inches. So really quite a fun block to make. So if I'm making a block like this, and I'm going to cut this in half so that I can use both halves, on my square, usually on the lighter one if you've got a choice of colour, I've got them right sides together, and you want to mark that line down the centre. So that's really just a matter of popping a ruler on and going from point to point. I often use a mechanical pencil for this, just because that's what I like to do. We're actually going to stitch 1/4 inch either side, so if you wanted to, you could go ahead and mark that 1/4 inch, or you can use your 1/4 inch foot, which is what I'll be doing on the sewing machine. So having done that, I've cut my 5 squares of my blue, I've cut my 2 squares of white, 2 squares of grey. I've already sewn one lot. I'll just show you on this next one how to do that, and then we'll be ready to put our block together, and then we'll have a little bit of a play with it. So I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch either side of that centre diagonal line there. Just regular sewing thread. My 1/4 inch foot lines up with that line for me, so that works quite nicely. If you were doing several of these, making several blocks, you could chain piece these through. Today I'm only making one. So that line on the edge of my foot there is lining up with that centre diagonal line. So I've got my 2 lines of stitching, and now I'm going to cut that in half. I love the names of some of these blocks. I'd be interested to know why it's called the Contrary Wife. Who was the Contrary Wife? So I'm just going to cut now on that diagonal line that we drew, the centre line, so that we're now left with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each of these half square triangles. I'm going to bring the iron over, and I'm going to press those towards the darker colour. My iron's gone to sleep. I like to press from the front. I like to let that just flip over so that I get a nice smooth press along that join line, and not a possibility of a little pleat that can happen sometimes when we press from the other side. So that's those all ready to go. But we do need to just trim them a little bit. We could have cut them at an exact size, which would have been 3 7/8 inches, and then you've got to get everything absolutely exact. I like to have it just that slightly bit larger at 4 inches, and then just trim down just a little whisker, just to make it nice and square, because I found that with fabric it tends to want to move and wobble a little bit, and if we just trim it down afterwards, we usually end up with a better result. So I'm just lining up on my ruler. I've got a diagonal line. I'm going to line that up with the diagonal line on my square, and this is just going to fit here. So it's just a tiny bit that I'm trimming off just to straighten those edges. So I can trim off 2 sides there. And it really is just a little tiny whisker that you can see there. And then I turn the block around and the same thing. So these are my 2 trimmed edges, and now I'm going to place that diagonal line back on there, and I've got a little mark here that's 3.5 inches in, because we're trimming to 3.5, and then I'm just going to again just trim off that tiny little bit up along those 2 sides just to straighten that up. And what we've ended up with is a much neater, tidier square than what we started out with, which is this slightly wonky one here. So I'll just trim that one as well, because we need that one too. So on the diagonal, I'll make sure that your 3.5 sits on that, like that you're sitting within your square there, so that it will trim to the right size. Don't go chopping off more than you need to. Again, diagonal line, 3.5 inches in on both edges there. Trim that. And then we've got a very nice tidy 3.5 inch square, which is now the same size as our coloured squares, which are also 3.5 inches. So now what we want to do is lay those out so that we can join up a 9 patch. So we've got a blue square, and make sure you get the direction correct on these. You can set the whole thing out before you start sewing if you want to. We're going to sew them across, so these ones, the darks, meet together at the where they connect at those corners. And now we just need to join those up into a 9 patch, so I'll go ahead and do that. So I'm going to chain piece down these bits here. Again, just using your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'll pick up the next ones ready there. And the next one. And of course, if you were making multiple blocks, you could get them all ready and start joining them in great long chains. I'm just doing one today. So that's looking pretty good so far, but we've now got to come back and do another chain. I personally prefer to cut these apart. You can leave them all joined up if you'd like to. I get in a little tangle if I leave them all joined up. And I've got to come down now and add on the next piece there. So I'll go ahead and do that and show you the next stage in just a second. So I've joined my 3 strips together of 3 squares, 3 rows. Now I'm going to press the seams, and I just wanted to show you what I was going to do here. So this is my center row, this is my center square. So I'm actually going to press the seams into that center square on that one, and on this one I'm going to press them out. You could just go all in one direction. There's lots of different ways of doing it. What you want to be able to do though is nestle the seams, so one going one way and one the other when you join them. Because I've got a white fabric here, I like to press away from the white where possible, and so I'm going to press those ones out. So I'm going to come here and just press that over, and then I'm going to press, let that one settle down and press that one over. And then this one I'm going to press those in towards that center square so that they're in the opposite direction. Just make sure things are sitting nicely. And then I'm going to press these ones out into the blue again. And that's looking pretty good. I've got to now sew those 3 rows together to make my block. It really hasn't taken us very long, so I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you how we might pop it together with some other blocks. So I've joined my 3 rows together, and I'm just going to press those. So this time I am just going to press them in one direction. So just by lifting, that will let that one sit down nicely. And again, just keep on going and let that one flip over like that. and it's looking pretty good. My seams are looking pretty good in general. I'm happy with that. So now I'd already made a couple of blocks, of course, and now I've got 4 of these blocks, so I could now set them. So we're going to do just a little bit of block play now. So this is not necessarily a super exciting block on its own. However, when you start putting them together, you start getting this slightly different. Remember, you're going to lose your 1/4 inch seams on those, and you start getting a different sort of configuration happening. You could have changed colours, you could have different colours and things if you wanted to, but just to make it in its sort of raw state, that's what I've done. And I had a little play again with this software program, and so that's just the block. And then if I was going to just join a whole lot of those together, well, not a whole lot, but several, more than I've done, it might end up looking a bit more like this. So it's just this, more of them together, and you end up with this quite interesting, striking diagonal design quilt. And I think that's kind of fun. But I might then want to turn them, a couple of them around. I'll turn these ones around, I think. And then we're going to end up with a different look. So if you turn every alternate block, so not every block, but the alternate ones, it suddenly starts forming a whole different look, and you can get this sort of chain type look going on, which if there was more blocks it would start looking a bit more like this, so that you get this nice diagonal grid going on. So all I've done is turn a block, every alternate block, and it's as simple as that. So you make all the blocks exactly the same, you just turn one of them around. And then beyond that, I might think, oh well, what would it look like if I put a little bit of sashing between them, separate them out. So if I just pull those apart now and just pop a little bit of sashing, I'm going to put a sashing post in, and these are just 2.5 inch wide strips that I've cut, the same size as the block, because again it changes the look. So whilst a simple or possibly slightly uninteresting block, and a particularly one with a diagonal kind of thing going on within it, can do quite a lot of different things with it. It can become quite changeable. So with the sashing in, you might end up with something like that, which just changes the look again. It just opens things up a little bit more. So I just thought that was a really interesting block. I like the name, Contrary Wife. I like the block. I like its simplicity. I like that you can do so many different things with it, and I'm sure there's even more. So that would be your homework, to work out what else you could do with it. So a relatively simple 9-patch block, Contrary Wife, and go and make something really interesting with it. Thank you.